everybody. I'm Allison Cuddy, the Marilyn Thoma Artistic Director of the Chicago Humanities Festival, and delighted to be here welcoming you to today's program, Maria Hinojosa, Once I Was You. This program and many more are free and open to the public throughout our fall season. You can learn more about our upcoming events at chicagohumanities.org, and I encourage you to lend your support, make a donation, or become a member. You can also learn more about our commitment to accessibility there. Thanks to support from CHF audiences, all of our digital events have closed captioning, which can be controlled through YouTube. Thank you to our captioner today. And good news, this program will have both Spanish and English subtitles. So in my previous life in public radio, the voice of Maria Hinojosa was a constant presence, one that is compassionate, grounding, and groundbreaking. I'm delighted that she's back at CHF and in conversation with another essential voice, Jose Antonio Vargas. Together, they are two of the most compelling and urgent thinkers on civil rights in America, seen especially through the lens of their deep personal and, as award-winning journalists, intellectual connections to immigration. So please join me in giving a very warm digital welcome to Jose Antonio Vargas and Maria Hinojosa.
Hi, I'm Jose Antonio Vargas. I'm the founder of Divine American and the author of a book called Dear America, Notes of an Undocumented Citizen. I'm thrilled for this conversation with one of my favorite human beings and one of my favorite journalists, Maria Hinojosa. We're going to talk about her book. And this book, Once I Was You, is wonderful for many reasons. But one of them is that the book, like all great memoirs, captures you, Maria, as a complex, multi-layered human being. The immigrant Maria, the journalist Maria, the activist Maria, the innovative, groundbreaking media entrepreneur Maria, the daughter, sister, friend Maria, the mother and wife Maria. All those identifiers make Maria the whole person that she is. And I've known Maria for a while now. Actually, the first time I met her was in 2008 at a journalism convention in Chicago. But I felt, reading this book, I felt like I was getting to know you so much more intimately. And in a chapter called Embracing a New Identity, this is Maria leaving Chicago to go to New York City for college. Maria writes, I had looked up the definition of the word radical. It meant going to the root of things. And that's how I saw myself. This book, to me, this book gets at the root. Like Maria, it is radical. So now I really want to bring in Maria Hinojosa.
Oh.
No, I'm sorry. The last time we did this was the opposite, right? Like
I know, and I made you cry, but you just made me cry because, you know, to pull that out, Jose, that very specific detail of me actually looking up, wait a second, what does the word radical really mean? And for me, it changed everything. I was like, yes, I'm a radical, but that's because I'm going to the root, or I want to go to the root.
But honestly, though, after reading the book, I felt like it was an emotional root canal. I felt like you did get to the root of it, right? And I mean, there's many ways this conversation can go, just given how we are with each other. And I've accomplished one of my goals, which is to make her cry. Great. I actually want to, you know, we've been friends for a while now, and we communicate with each other. You know, when I finished my documentary, you were the first person I called and said, do this. When I finished my book, I said, I want to talk about the process of this book. Like, how was this book birthed? Like, when did you realize that, okay, I have to do this? When did that happen?
Actually, you may even remember, Jose, because it just kind of happened. I was on prime time on MSNBC with Joy, who was a friend of ours. And at that time, I actually was doing a lot more primetime MSNBC, which was fun. Not so much this time around, which is a separate conversation. But anyway, I had a moment, and Steve Cortez, who is a Trump supporter, used the term illegal to refer to human beings, immigrants. And I stopped him and I said, look, there's no such thing as an illegal human being. Illegal is not a noun. And I just kind of did what you and I do all the time. I was just speaking my truth. Well, that thing went viral. and Univision, you know, Fusion ended up making a little video of that, and that went viral. 10 million people saw it. And a very close friend of mine said, that's the book that you have to write. You have to write the book, Illegal is Not a Noun. And I was like, yes, I do. And so, Jose, actually, this book was going to be a little pocket book. You know, those little pocket books that you have? That was my idea. Like, let me just write this real fast. It's like a 10-point guide of why illegal is not a noun. Like short, simple, people at the airport will pick it up and they'll be like, oh, okay, why I should never use the term illegal to refer to a human being. Well, people were really interested in that book. You know, when I actually went ahead and decided to get an agent and, you know, decided to dip back into the world of publishing because it's very scary. It's a scary world. It's a lot of work. You got to have a very thick skin, and really you have to have people who around you who really love you and believe in you. So there really wasn't that much love for that idea of like a small book. And so that's how this ended up coming. You know, and there were many iterations. I thought it was going to be a book, a love letter to my daughter, who deserves a book, because my son got Raising Raul, and my daughter's like, "Where's the book?" So ultimately, what ended up happening once the editor Michelle Herrera Mulligan, who's a phenomenal editor from Simon and Schuster, once she got involved in the project, and we talked about this not being just my story, the linear story, which is sure it's interesting, it's fine, but it was much more about all of those different parts of my life that you mentioned so beautifully, and also talking about history and policy and politics and what it looked like. I was just thinking, Jose, actually that one of the communities I hope reads this book is the Vietnamese community.
Yes.
Because for me, the Vietnamese experience, the refugee experience marks me as a human being, as a child. And I end up kind of resolving that by then becoming a journalist and giving, at least in one case, a Vietnamese woman who had ended up in Corpus Christi, voice. Because so many Vietnamese were they were the first televised refugee crisis. And as you know, they were reduced to terminology, horrific terminology that journalists use to refer to people as boat people. So even in the deconstructing of that, it's a way in which we can find ourselves in each other in this book, hopefully.
Well, actually, what I was going to say is I love how much history is interwoven throughout the book, right? And kind of a lot of like zooming in, zooming out, and then zooming back in, and how it's so crocheted in your life, you know. And part of what I was thinking about was when you arrived here in 1961, when your father arrived here in 1961, right, was 4 years before the Immigration and Nationality Act, which you outline a lot in the book, right? And I actually want to talk about that. Like, did you feel that part of your role here as a journalist, as a Mexican American journalist, is to correct a lot of history?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. But doing it, I felt like at one point, like this was a love letter to my country. It was like a reckoning with this country, the United States, where I was kind of saying, but how could you do this? And how could you do this? And the sad truth, Jose, that we realize that white supremacy has been in this country from the moment that the Pilgrims arrived, right? And so we have to, as a country, understand what that means. You know, one of the other things that happens was that finding connections with other communities. One of the more beautiful moments in the writing of this book was when, in the writing of the history part, you know, the first people who were excluded by law from the United States, were Asian women, Chinese women.
Yes.
Before the Chinese Exclusion Act was law, they were saying the women can't come. And I began to think those women were my mom. And so now I feel, you know, when I see Asian women, I'm like, Iske, I'm tied to you, you're tied to me. And we don't even know these stories because so much of history doesn't talk about this per se.
It actually, for me, that was so jarring. I mean, let me just read something from the book that I had to read it, and then I actually had to stop and like realize what I had just read. This is from the book about the Bracero program. Maria writes, Braceros kept coming on until 1964 when the apparent exploitation and labor violations inherent in the program became untenable, especially during the civil rights era when people were paying closer attention to the kinds of injustices. Under the program, 4.6 million labor contracts were signed. The Braceros helped to keep the US economy afloat and advance agricultural productivity during those years. Yet, there is almost no record or acknowledgement of their contribution today. After I read that, I was like, wait, what?
Yeah. And that's what I talk about. Part of the work of this book, I think, is to correct that narrative.
Yes.
You know, to constantly just be saying like, wait a second. And there were things that I found out in the writing of this book where I too was just like, you know, over and over again, just like, oh my God, how did this happen? You know, the Braceros, it's actually a really important part of history because I think if both Democrats and Republicans had their druthers, they'd be way happy to just have a Bracero program. They'd be way happy to just bring it back. Oh yeah, just bring the laborers over, treat them however you want, you know, but as long as they've got a little green card that, you know, means they're not going to be forcibly deported or put into ICE detention facilities and sick, etc. Just bring them all in. And after they're done, send them back. Oh, what benefits? Oh, what retirement? Oh, what healthcare? No, they're just workers. Just let them come in. There's so many of them. And that's what's so painful about our experience as immigrants in this country is that, sure, there are some people who come to this country who have no interest in staying here. Okay, fine. But then there are many of us who do and want to stay, and not only want to stay, but actually feel an ownership of this place. And the fact that we would be reduced to you're just labor is what's really, well, and invisible, right?
Well, but that was one of the themes. And, you know, this is the other thing that I thought was so really not only compelling, but I always kept being haunted by the fact that the language around this, the fact that Mexicans were only seen as quote unquote workers, right? No wonder you can't look at them as people. All you think about is their labor, right? And part of that history too, as I was reading that you reminded me, is the Republicans' role in kind of the modern immigration conversation, and how, you know, President Bush, the first President Bush, was really more immigrant friendly than what we remembered. How was that when you were researching that part of the book?
That, I have to say, that part of the work has been revealing to me, but also just, and basically the long story, to make it short, is that both Republicans and Democrats have actively thrown immigrants under the bus. So people will read this book and they'll just be like, wait, George H.W. Bush was actually good on refugees. He was the only one in the recent 50 years who increased noticeably the number of refugees allowed. He was the one who signed temporary protective status for so many. So this is George H.W. Bush. And the Republican Party talked about immigrants in this kind of glowing way, whereas Bill Clinton was making anti-immigrant ads and was busy actually building the beginning of the wall. So I think that this is important because we cannot have the illusion, right, of again, who controls the narrative? Who controls the narrative, and then what's actually been happening, what's actually been the policies. The thing about Reagan, who was the predecessor to George H.W. Bush, is that Ronald Reagan, as you know, created the Immigration Reform and Control Act, which actually allowed about 3 million undocumented immigrants to actually become citizens. That was amazing. Problem was that he was actively, and this is a big part of the book too, actively bombing Central America, sending military war, sending soldiers down there, you know, participating in genocidal activities, you know, by soldiers that were trained by American military. So it hasn't been good.
And that was a part of the book that I really appreciated was, again, how you're not only living history and witnessing history, but you're reporting on history, right? And for me, by the way, you know, who we're talking to here is the premier Latina journalist in the United States of America, right? And so I had to keep reminding myself that. I was like, wait, this is like Diane Sawyer, Barbara Walters. This is like, right? And as I was reading that, I kept thinking to myself, the whole chapter on the Obama, on kind of the Obama part of this, given that this is the Chicago Humanities Festival, given that Rahm Emanuel used to be the mayor of Chicago, given that Rahm Emanuel was the first chief of staff to President Obama. That was one of the part of the book that I was really savoring, I have to say. Because it's savoring as a journalist and as an undocumented person who has yet to really see and read kind of a full reckoning that, for me, for the first time, I'm seeing in writing in your book. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that was like, to that event that you were emceeing in Washington, D.C., when honoring Sonia Sotomayor, the first Latina Supreme Court justice, and then introducing President Obama, and knowing that feeling in your stomach that, wait a second, how is this really going to turn out?
You totally described that just like such a good journalist. You like went right in the scene. Yeah, because the scene is that, after George W. Bush, where I didn't have much access,
Yes,
in the White House, suddenly Obama's elected. The Congressional Hispanic Caucus is holding this big event, this big gala. There's a VIP tent, and like now I'm in the VIP tent. I was like, whoa, how did this happen, right? And I'm with Sonia Sotomayor. So it's this kind of beautiful moment of like, wow, things are really going to change. And you're right. I was on stage getting ready to introduce Barack Obama, who I had not met. And I was very excited, of course. And when he comes out on stage after I introduce him, he actually takes me and he whispers in my ear, he says, "I miss hearing your show." And I said, "You can listen to it anytime, but it's nice that we're both Hyde Parkers, because we're both from Chicago, Hyde Park, Chicago." I was like, "But we're both Hyde Parkers." And he said, "Yes, we are. It's so good to see you." And off he went. He gave his speech. And then when I came back on stage to kind of wrap up is when I said, wait a second. This is a moment in history. What's just happened here? And as journalists, we have to hold politicians accountable. I don't care if I'm in a gala and I'm all dressed up, and I just introduced him and he gave me an amazing dip hug. It was beautiful. I have to hold him accountable. And so I said, remember, President Barack Obama, there is no such thing as an illegal human being. We do not refer to these terms. We are human beings. And I just and it was a kind of a political moment. And not everybody started, because it was a moment of answering back. Yes.
It was a party. And
it was a huge party. And I'm just like, and by the way, can we talk about this? Because I think you're right, Jose. I think part of what we're getting at is that as journalists, and in many ways, this is a journalist's book in a lot of ways, we're not going to drink the Kool-Aid anywhere.
What I will never forget, and this is something that I've never really shared publicly before, but I will never forget, was I was asked by the White House and Cecilia Munoz, who's featured in the groundbreaking Frontline documentary, Lost in Detention, that Maria produced and hosted. Please check it out if you haven't seen it. I was asked to moderate a conversation on YouTube about immigration right after DACA was announced. And that was the other thing, by the way, in this book, is Maria tells the story of really how DACA happened, right? That it wasn't Obama who made DACA happen, but it's the work of activists, like many of whom are my friends, who pushed for that. And Maria calls me out of the blue. I don't even know how you heard about this event, but of course you heard about it. And you said, "Jose, you better not get used by this White House."
Oh my
Jose,
God.
do you remember that?
Oh my God.
Called me and you said,
did.
"Jose, you better not be used by this White House." And I just remember thinking to myself, because it's great, because there's Maria, my friend, but then there's Maria, the journalist who I've always put in a pedestal in my head, going, "Okay, Jose, you better not be used by this White House." And you're right that the book is in many ways a memoir. I mean, I kept thinking about Ben Bradley's memoir, right? Like, no, in that way, because it covers so much ground in that way. And I have to say, though, I have to ask you this question. President Obama is in the process of writing his memoirs now. How do you think President Obama is gonna justify and talk about the deportation of 4 million people, human beings under his watch, given that he would not have won president and gotten reelected without the Latinx vote. How do you think he's going to talk about this?
You know, here's the thing is that President Barack Obama, I mean, I was at parties where Barack was at because we both went to, I was at Barnard, he was at Columbia University.
Yeah.
He was in Hyde Park, you know, my community. His kids went to the school where I went to for high school. I know the neighborhood, the local spot. That 31 Flavors where he bought Michelle Obama their first date. I was going to that 31 Flavors when I was 5 years old. So I feel a connection to Barack Obama so deeply, and to Michelle as well. And yet there is this wound between us because I, like you and a few other journalists, have wanted to hold him accountable because he is a constitutional scholar.
Yeah.
And so I have to understand, and this is the question for him, is how is it that he put together being a constitutional scholar, but knowing that every single hour, every single minute, people were being denied due process simply because they weren't born in this country. And that's you, Jose, and that's me, right?
Yeah.
That's what it came down to. So I know this is painful. And you know, I'm back in therapy. I just put it out on my Twitter. I'm like, okay, I'm back in therapy.
I saw that yesterday.
Right? You know, it is painful to go back in and how to kind of look at all these, you know, things that happen and trauma. So I would just make an offer to President Barack Obama, to say, I'm here for that conversation. Because because we've gone beyond the point where it's like, that's not what this is about. This is about our hearts and how he's my same age. I mean, we're so equal in so many ways. We have to be able to look at each other in the eyes, because I know he cares about me. I know he listens to the work. I know he cares about you. And we need to have a coming together. So that's like a more public request. Like, we can do this and we have to do it. But how he's going to resolve that, I think, is going to require some very deep work.
Because for me though, what I keep thinking about is the difference between being a writer and being a politician. And Barack Obama is an incredible writer, right? Writers are here to tell the truth, which is what you've done in this book. Politicians sometimes can't afford to tell the truth. So how that reconciles itself, I think, is going to be.
I hope
interesting.
I hope he does, and I say this with love.
Yeah.
But I hope that he does some therapy around this. I say it with love because we have to process, and owning something, like I had to own my rape in the book. You know, it's like, you have to do a lot of work, and it's not fun, and you got to see your therapists, and we wish that of Barack, with love. We do.
Actually, that was the next part that I was going to go to, because again, I thought I knew you, right? And I have known you for years and years and years now, but there were many parts of this book that just, I didn't know, right? And so for me, as your friend and as someone who's followed your career, you writing about that rape, and in many ways, you know, we're living through right now a movement of movements, right? The Black Lives Matter movement, the immigrant rights movement, the Me Too movement. And you were at DePaul University, you know, teaching a class on Latinas, mental health, and depression. When you were, your students said, check out this Netflix series, 13 Reasons Why?
That's exactly what happened. I came in one morning, my class on Latinas, mental health, and depression, 8 o'clock in the morning in Chicago in the winter. So we had to battle it. And I remember coming in, and they were all the young women. There's mostly young women in that class, all young women. All Latinas. We're talking, you know, and I said, what are you guys talking about? What is it? What's the thing? What is it? Is it a dance? Is it a song? And they were like, oh, we're talking about this documentary or this drama, 13 Reasons Why. I had a teenage daughter at that time who was battling anxiety. And so when they talked about what it had to do with mental health, high schoolers, I said, okay. And they said, you should watch it. Yeah, Jose, that was not what I was expecting to have happen. Watching 13 Reasons Why would be the thing. And by the way, I think everybody got it wrong. It is not, and I only saw season 1, but it is not a show about suicide. Yeah. It is a show about sex shaming, slut shaming, sexual assault, and teenage girls. It is the story of what we had to live through, even in this country, with the nomination of Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh.
Yeah.
So, so what happens is that I watch that show, and there's something that happens in the show, which is that they do really capture rape in a way that you don't really see it often, and it really did just like
Triggered.
It triggered, which I had not really. I mean, I knew PTSD because of 9/11 triggers, but I had never experienced something like this, and that was when I decided, okay, I really have to do the therapy on it. I really have to understand how this impacted me as a woman for decades. So I'm better now, which is the cool part. I like about the fact that there's also things that I reveal about myself that are a little bit unexpected. That I enjoy erotica now because I can, because I understand that I was, to use that term, I was a victim of rape.
Yeah, you're a survivor.
It messes with your head. Yes.
When your therapist said that, right? You were a survivor, and it was like, wait a second, I'm bohemian, I'm a radical, I'm all of these things, but you had not thought of yourself in that way.
Ever. And also as a journalist, we, like being a bohemian, okay, like an activist when I was in high school, but a survivor?
Yeah.
And I am, I have to acknowledge, I am a survivor.
And let me just say, as a writer, the way, the restraint in the writing of all of that, and I thought how it was unexpected, but it was and then after I read it, I look back in previous chapters and I'm thinking, oh, she was foreshadowing this. I'm sorry, as someone who's written a book, like structures are really important, and the way this book is structured, it's structured incredibly well, right? And you're right that in some ways it is a book, it is the book of a journalist. So now let's talk about that. Like the theme of this year's Chicago Humanities Festival is vision. And in some ways, your career as a woman of color, as a Latina, as a Mexican American, as an American, is that shapes your journalism career. And there are many parts in this book. I was really struck, for example, by that exchange at CBS News when one of your colleagues said, Maria, you have an agenda. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. So you're actually, the person who said that to me was from NPR.
Oh, for NPR.
That was an NPR editor who actually said, he was my first real editor as a New York reporter. And he just said, oh, come on, Maria, everybody knows about your agenda. And I was like, wait, what? What agenda? Wait, you guys, everybody knows what's the agenda? It was like, we all know about your Latino agenda. And I was like, what? I just remember feeling like that's really, and I remember saying, well, then that means that you must have a white male agenda because that's what you are. And he said, it's not the same.
What year was that again? What year was that again?
That would have been 90. Yeah, that would have been like 93, maybe 93, 94, maybe.
I really circled it when I was reading the book, because of course I thought about all those moments when I was at the Washington Post when somebody said I had an agenda, and as someone who many journalists, especially journalists of color, especially young female journalists, look at you as like an icon and a role model. What do you say to them in terms of when an editor or a colleague says to them, "Hey, you have an agenda"? What should they say?
Well, here's the most important thing. I don't want them to give up. That is, I hope that is something that comes through the book, which is there
absolutely
are a lot of highs and lows, and we're all on a wave of this beautiful thing called life. And I'm very thankful to be alive, honestly, as a survivor of COVID. So I mostly want them to not give up. They have to find the person, the elder, the group of friends who they can vent to get this off their chest, because we need them strong to be in those newsrooms. Now, the cool thing is that, what ends up happening is that I end up creating my own newsroom, right? Like you create your own company, we create our own space. And so I feel like for a lot of these journalists, there are spaces now that like my company is run by women of color, majority immigrant. You know, we are we emphasize cultural competency, and we actually have a corporate culture, if you will,
Yeah.
that is about actually transparency and conversation, deep editorial. But you know, we're creating that. So I don't want them to give up. I don't know. Look, the truth is that I'm a working woman. I was about to say, I don't know why it is that I didn't give up. And I'm like, I know why, because I'm a working woman. I'm not independently wealthy. So this notion of like, well, I'm just going to stop doing this and do something else. It's like, no,
Yeah.
this is my job. I get a paycheck. I pay the bills. I have to do this. It's not like, oh, I'm just going to. No, I mean, the big question would have been, Jose, for me to leave and to take a corporate job, just doing like corporate communications or PR. And
Which you
that's
could have
not,
easily done.
which I could have easily done and gotten paid a lot of money. And, you know, who knows, but money has never been what moves me. And I learned that from my father and his sense of mission and being a medical doctor that wanted to help, you know, create the cochlear implant. Money has never moved me. So what I say to these young journalists is understand, and look, Jose Antonio Vargas, por favor, he is our teacher of this. He is the embodiment of our Frederick Douglass right here. I know you don't like it when I say that, but it is true, because Jose Antonio Vargas is showing us, right, that no matter whatever restrictions you have or limitations, we have this thing as journalists that we have to do. We are journalists. Listen to that voice inside of you and hold on to that and don't give up. We need you so desperately. And wait, one last thing, because this is important. Besides reading my book and Jose Antonio Vargas' book, please read Juan Gonzalez and Joe Torres. The book is News for All the People. It's a history of journalists of color in the United States. Now, it's this big. Don't get afraid. Don't get afraid, but read segments of it so that you can be fertilized and understand that we need you.
You know, when I was reading it, of course, I was circling a lot of things, but one of the things I kept reminding myself was, so the first Latina in NPR DC's newsroom, there were so many firsts, and then I kept thinking to myself, so you have broken this ground so that people like us, you know, not only hopefully it would be easier, but that we know that somebody came before. But you keep breaking new ground. So I want to talk about your vision for the Futuro Media Group. Like, in the book, of course, you tell us why you ended up starting it, but here you are now, 10 years into it. And it is a tremendous success. I mean, In the Thick podcast, if you don't listen to it, please download it now, listen to it. Talk to us about what it is. I mean, you must be, to me, one of the few, if not the only, Latina head of a news media company that's independent, correct?
As far as I know, I'm the only Latina that runs a nonprofit newsroom in the United States. As far as I know, hopefully, you know, maybe we'll find out more.
Yeah.
But when I created Futuro Media, that wasn't what I was thinking. I mean, the story of the creation behind Futuro Media, there is a great story in the book. It involves 60 Minutes, but we're not going to reveal, but you should get it because it's juicy.
You should get it.
It's very juicy. It's very, very juicy what happens at that moment. But when I created Futuro Media, Jose, somebody asked me recently in an interview, they said, what was your vision? I was like, to make it to 3 years. That was the most important. I was like, can we just get Futuro Media as a small nonprofit independent to make it to 3 years? Because what I've heard is that the 3-year mark for nonprofits is where they either die or they survive. And here we are, you know, well into our 10th year, and we are growing. And the reason why I think we're growing is because it was not about making money. That was not our intention. So we are a nonprofit. And I believe that we were lucky enough to have, well, I had decades of work under my belt. And so there was a kind of, a reputation, credibility, authenticity. You know, that thing that oftentimes cost me in moments of the mainstream media where I would be told, oh, you're too close to this story. Oh, you care too much. Oh, you're too immigrant-y, you're too woman-y, all of those things. that those would be the things that actually end up really helping me to understand the kind of journalism that needs to be produced right now. And why do I think that the audience for Futuro's properties, whether it's Latino Rebels, Latino USA, In the Thick, why do I think they're growing? Is actually because we approach it. I know it's a little crazy, Jose Antonio Vargas, to hear journalists talking about love, but actually we do approach it with love. The way I think, I always felt that, I don't know if I ever told you this, but I think one of the things that I loved about you when we met, because I already knew your work, was that I was like, this guy is motivated by love. I mean, yes, he's really an aggressive journalist, and yes, he's ambitious in the sense that he understands the power of social media. But Jose Antonio Vargas loves this work, and loves the power of this work. And so when you're motivated by love, the way I believe Frederick Douglass was, the way I believe Ida B. Wells was, the way I believe Jovita Idar was, these are all my mentors, my journalistic mentors. That keeps us going. We cannot give up, though. That's the whole thing. We just can't give up.
And again, what I found really astounding was the resilience of, like, as you said, we'll make it up to 3 years. Here you are in 10 years. How do we make payroll? So now I'm in charge of people's paychecks. Like, as somebody who has an organization myself, I know very well all of that. But I was really struck by the vulnerability of sharing all those highs and lows, that I thought, like, any professional, you don't have to be a journalist, but any professional would understand what it means to basically make something of yourself. I mean, you have created your own institution, Maria Hinojosa. I mean, how incredible is that? You know, and so, okay, see, this is one thing. The last thing, I have so many more questions, but we're running out of time. The last thing I want to ask you is, going back to that place about radical getting at the root of things, what did you end up knowing about yourself?
Wow.
After the writing of this book.
Wow.
Of Maria Hinojosa.
That's really deep, Jose. Thank you for that beautiful question. I mean, the first thing that came to mind was my father, because I feel like I made a lot of peace with my father. I feel like, you know, he died before he could see this book, but I feel like I made a lot of peace with him. Like, I was like, oye, me papi, I put you through so much, man. I was such a rebel. I was such a radical, and you kind of had to bear the brunt of it, and you never stopped loving me. So there was that. I think there was my coming to terms with being a survivor of rape and what that meant as a young woman. I think that there is, you know, the journalist in me that had to make a lot of peace with, you know, I don't work in the mainstream media anymore. I don't work in those companies, and it can be very lonely out here. And yet, you know, feeling a tremendous amount of love for that commitment. So I feel like there's a really important lesson, I hope, in terms of ego. That's when you ask, why do you reveal these things? Look, one of the things I tell my students, and you've met my students, you spoke to my class at DePaul University in Chicago, where I taught. Thank you, DePaul, we love you. You know, I tell my students that they need to walk around in the room like, you know, strutting their shoulders like, I am all this, and I'm like, I am, you know, this is how I need you to walk, like with a huge ego. I need them to walk with a huge ego, because we need to build up our egos. The thing is that, you know, also we have to understand our humility. And my family is the one who is very clear on, like, this is my favorite thing my daughter says, I don't need Maria Hinojosa in my house. I need my mom. I need my mom. And so that's why I write about these things, because I want people to understand that it's not, you know, when people are like, oh my God, you're famous, or you use that word, oyeme, icon. I'm like, what does that even mean? The icon. I'm just like, I'm this 5 foot, you know, woman, like, here I am. So to me, it is about being able to see ourselves in each other. And that's why in the end, because the last thing we came up with was the title. The last thing, it was scary. We could not come up with a title. But in the end, it was like, that is, once I was you, you know, Jose, you and I are, we couldn't be more different. And yet I am you, I feel you. And that's something really that I hope we can take away from this book.
Well, I mean, the beginning chapter and the end, all of that kind of comes together, which I loved, I have to say. Now, let me say this, since this is the Chicago Humanities Festival, the first time I heard of this festival was because I'm obsessed with everything Toni Morrison, as Maria knows. And Toni Morrison's most amazing speeches is at a Chicago Humanities Festival. And when I was preparing for this, I pulled up the speech in thinking of your book. And this is what it said in this speech that she gave. She said, quote, "Our list of priorities in the nation seldom include how to function, how to be alone, incompetent, in solitude, how to nurture friendship rather than how to network, how to approach and perceive beauty, not how to sell it, collect it, or exclude it from others, how to inhabit the body, not how to reconstruct, decorate, or simply medicate it, how to discriminate among various truths and their claims, how to narrate the self, how to articulate and informs one's own experience, not how the self is spoken of, but how it speaks to its own existence without erasing another's. Most importantly, how to think about the quality of life."
Mm.
To me, reading this book, which you must purchase, tells me about the quality of life that Maria Hinojosa has led and continues to lead, and how I feel really privileged to be a part of it in the way that I am. So thank you so much for the work, Maria, and thank you for always laying the ground, and thank you for always keeping us honest.
Love you, Jose. Thank you so much. You made me cry again. So that's
That was
twice.
the plan, but
That's twice. And thank you to the Chicago Humanities Festival. It's such an honor to be a part of this conversation. And oh my God, mi hermanito, Jose Antonio Vargas, thank you so much.
I can't wait to see you. I can't wait to hug you. Congratulations on the book.
Big hugs.